Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I want to approach a topic that's been something that's I've been following for a number of years. When you grow up in the United States, African Americans are accustomed to having, TV shows and films in which, the majority of the cast, the director, uh, the screenwriters are often Black, the majority Black cast. And then the films and TV series will have just storylines that, a lot of Black people can relate to. It's even with our complaints of underrepresentation, when you compare the situation with African Americans in the American media versus Afro-Brazilians in the Brazilian media, in some ways we could say, well, wow, okay, we might not be as representative as we would like to be, but in comparison to Brazil, we got it made. When I first started, you know, checking out the situation of Black Brazilians, and I would go to the country every year. I lived in Sao Paulo for 9 years, and I was just blown away at how, my first few times visiting Brazil, well, up until about 2008, the primarily my experience, the majority of my experiences were in Bahia, where you just see a lot of Black people in Bahia. I spent time in Rio. I spent some time in Minas Gerais. And my question was always, why is it that I see so many Black people in these states, but I turn on the television and the movies coming out of Brazil, and you would just assume that this country was somewhere in Europe. That's been the argument for years that according to Brazil's media, Brazil is just an extension of Europe in the tropics. You know, Afro-Brazilian activists have been speaking on this for years, and then you have, African Americans coming to Brazil and making the same comments. I remember Spike Lee had come to the country once. I have to go back and look at that article, but it was something like, if you were to look at Brazil's television for the people that they show on television, you would think the country was just all blonde. Al Jazeera did a report some years ago where they used the example of this news program that came on one of Brazil's top television networks, Rede Record, or Record TV. And the name of the program was Fala Brazil, which means Speak Brazil. But they was like looking at the anchors and the reporters on the show and all of the white women. They were just like, maybe a better name for this show would be Speak Denmark, because according to the phenotype of the women that was presenting the news, you might as well have been in Denmark. So for years, there's been a complaint of underrepresentation and then stereotypical representation when Blacks are presented in Brazil's media. But I'm not the only person who's noticed, but in the last few years, there's been a dramatic change in Afro-Brazilian representation in the film and television industry. Yeah, of course, there's still improvements that must be made, true. But I think there's been more progress like in the last 2 to 5 years than the previous 25 years. This when I would go to the bookstores in Brazil, you didn't see many Afro-Brazilian authors. You didn't see many books about Afro-Brazilians, like biographies or autobiographies, anything like that. A lot of the books that you see or you saw in the bookstores were works by African American authors about African American subjects, and they were translated into Portuguese. It was like, besides a few athletes, I would find a book about Neymar or a book about Pele. I remember I saw a book maybe about Anderson Silva. Then I saw a book about Chimaya Musun. Musun is a very famous, popular like skit comedian from like the 80s and 90s. Chimaya is known as like the godfather of Brazilian soul music. So when they came out with a film about Chimaya, I think it was 2014 to 2015, I'm like, okay, this is impressive. There was a movie that was based on the book. And then there was a musical that was touring the country, telling the story of Chimaya. I was impressed with that. Here it is, what's that, 8, 9, 10 years later, and I'm starting to really see that Afro-Brazilians are being portrayed in, films. You're seeing more Afro-Brazilian representation in television series and films. both as in front of the camera and back of the camera, as actors and as director, screenwriters. I've even with the advances that I've seen, I've always questioned, like, okay, what's going on here? It's not that I'm complaining about the representation increase, because it was definitely necessary. But I'm always the person that says, okay, what's going on here? There's always some type of agenda that goes along with what you can see and then what you can't see. That's a story for another time. For now, I just want to talk about how I have to basically admit this, like, wow, Brazil's audio visual media has improved drastically. I see more Black Brazilians being represented in the press, in advertising billboards. I'm like, what is going on here? It's good to see, but really, what's going on here? Anyway, let me just get into today's story. Then I'm going to share a couple of links that kind of back up what I'm saying. As I've been talking about Brazil for over 2 decades, I could pull up material from, say, 2003, 2007, 2010. Some of this material is not even online anymore, but I could show you what people were saying as far back as 2005. Like, where are the Black faces in Brazil's media? And to look now, I just read a few days ago that there's going to be a biopic about the famed Afro-Brazilian writer Carolina de Jesus. That's a huge story. Carolina Jesus, that was one of the first books I read by a Black Brazilian about life in Brazil. So her story is being turned into a movie also. I'm hearing some great projects that's coming up. There's been a rise of Afro-Brazilian directors, filmmakers, and they're filling in this gap. Brazil has long ignored its Afro-Brazilian population, and this is really exciting to see that some of these stories are coming to be told. I mean, there was a particular film that I'm going to talk about, as I get into this article, and I'm like, that's intriguing that they chose this singing duo to do a film about them, because there's so many prominent figures in Afro-Brazilian culture and history that they could be talking about. And I'm like, wow, they made a film about this funk duo, this funk singing duo. And I'm like, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, if they can make a movie about those two guys, there are just a whole list of Afro-Brazilians that they can make biopics about. It's, Black Brazil is not just Pelé, the great Pelé. It's been almost a year since he passed away, but we're in exciting times. Joel Zito Araújo, one of the country's top Black filmmakers, I think he said somewhere, like, now, 2023, it's the golden age of Afro-Brazilian cinema. Anyway, before I get too far in, before I prolong this video any longer, let me just get into the topic for today. The story is called, the post is called After Decades of Invisibility and Stereotypes, Brazil is discovering the power of Black protagonism in films and on television. So let's get directly into this video. Okay, so what we have here are a number of recent productions, both on television, on the small screen and on the big screen, and film, where you just see a lot of Black Brazilian representation. A couple of these are two novellas that were featured on the country's top television network, Global TV. This is a film about a well-known, beloved Black comedian from the 80s and 90s. I'm going to talk about this later on. Let me just, talk about them real quick. This is a film called Marte, which translates as Mars One. This is a television show series that was put out by Global TV in recognition of the Black Consciousness Month. And then this is the film I was just talking about the popularity of this 1990s, well, I want to say early 2000s funk duo came. I believe those guys were from Rio de Janeiro. So to give you an idea of why what's going on today is such a big deal, I want to do a story. I want to present an article that talks about the flip side of the invisibility of Afro-Brazilians. And, I've taken, today's story comes from a number of sources. So let me just get into it for now. The first piece that I'm going to talk about is talking about Blacks and media and invisibilities. The second piece is going to be talking about the improvements that people have noticed in 2023. I'm not the only one who's noticed this. Anyway, so in the United States, the presence of sitcoms and series starring Blacks has been a reality since the 1970s. In Brazil, on the other hand, attempts to produce series with Black protagonists are very recent, dating back to the last decade. On TV Global, you had the Antonia series in 2006, a series called Suburbia in 2012, Sexo ASAS in 2014, and Mr. Brown in 2015. These are some of the visuals of what these series look like. Antonia is kind of like a hip hop, let's say, musical type of film based on the lives of these four Black women. Sexy as Niggas. It was highly criticized. I think it's from 2014. I just remember when the series came out, Global was talking about it had a majority Black cast, Black four Black women protagonists. They were kind of taking the Sex and the City brand that featured four white women, I believe, based in New York, and they turned this series into four Black women based in Rio de Janeiro. Highly criticized series. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Then you have Mr. Brown, 2015. This was a watershed moment in television because it presented Afro-Brazilians in a middle-class background. This show got a lot of acknowledgement. A lot of people liked that particular program. Let's keep this moving. The other thing I want to mention is that out of the series that I just mentioned, my favorite of all those series wasn't even mentioned in the group above, and that was a television series, Cidade dos Homens, which means City of Men. It ran in its first run from 2002 to 2005. Later, they recreated it in 2017 and 2018 for two more seasons. The two main characters from Cidade dos Homens actually comes from the 2002 international blockbuster Cidade de Deus, meaning City of God. Both of the two guys who were the main characters in Cidade dos Homens, meaning City of Men, these two guys here are Douglas Silva and Darlan Cunha. I absolutely love this series. I had the first four seasons. I had all four seasons on DVD. And what I liked about this series, it was actually kind of like treated as like a spinoff from the City of God film, the City of Men. How you have series or films and they produce a spinoff. What I liked about City of Men or Cidade dos Homens is that it gave a more well-rounded representation of everyday life for Black people in Rio de Janeiro. Whereas City of God, it was based a lot on, it recreated this sense of violence that goes on in the favelas, the slums of Rio de Janeiro. They positioned it as a place of danger where people should be afraid to go there. It was full of a lot of violence in the film. Had drug trafficking in the film. It just gave you the idea that poor majority Black areas in Brazil, in neighborhoods, are going to be very dangerous. You risk your life going into these places. It didn't really give you much of a family atmosphere of where these guys came from. That's the problem that I had when I remember watching City of God in 2002 in this film theater in Bahia, and I was impressed by the number of brown, Black-skinned people in that film. It was like a majority. If it wasn't, it was pretty close to a majority. Definitely the lead characters, right? But on the other hand, a person who doesn't live in Brazil, what would they conclude about Black Brazilians if they were to watch City of God? It was just the lead character in the film, Zé Pequeno or Lil Zay. I mean, the whole film, he was just seen shooting people. He was dealing dope, cocaine. And is this what Black people is about? No, that's what I would have thought. I mean, in my experiences in Brazil, I know that Black life in Brazil is more than what they put into Cidade de Deus, but that's the problem that I had with it. Again, either a lack of representation or the representation that you have is a stereotype. The gangster, the dope dealer, the violence, all of this is associated with the Black population. Cidade dos Homens, on the other hand, it presented everyday issues that people deal with. They approach issues like people who wanted to get into crime, the criminal element. It did represent that also. But then you had episodes where guys were talking about having sex for the first time. They had episodes where, one of the guys became a father and he was still a teenager. Very poignant storytelling. It had to deal. There were episodes where they talked about a kid, one of the guys, one of the two main characters. He didn't know who his father was, and when he saw this guy in the street, he had heard through his family that this guy could have possibly been his father because he grew up without a father. So they told a lot of just everyday stories, and it gave these people full characters and full personalities beyond just the gangsterisms and the violence that you found in the City of God. I would highly recommend this series if you haven't seen it, if you haven't heard of it. You could probably get it on Amazon. It has full English subtitles. It's out of all of the series that I watched, this is still my favorite to this day. And this series started like, what's this, 21 years ago. You can probably get it at Amazon.com, but highly recommend it. Cidade dos Homens, meaning city of men. Racism in Brazilian television, white TV, black characters still have little space and are the targets of stereotypes. Okay, this is another series. This is one of the aforementioned Suburbia. I think it came out in 2012 or 13. And again, Global hyped this as a 90% black cast. But after the first one or two episodes, it just descended into a mass of stereotypes, gangsterism, guns, violence. And it was just like, people looked and say, this is how you're going to present black people on TV. It was like, we don't care that you got a 90% black cast. What is the image that you're presenting in this series? It was clearly inspired by some of the In the Hood movies that came out of the United States in the 90s and the 2000s. I remember when Boys in the Hood came out in 1991. It was a great movie. It showed it gave, again, a well-rounded view of black life in that particular area. It was Los Angeles, California. But then Hollywood saw a formula that they wanted, and they narrowed it down. Like, we want films that show gangsterism and violence in the film. So you got all of these films that were coming out on the coattails of Boys in the Hood. And it was just like, okay, you're losing something here. This is the same thing I felt with Suburbia. This is the same thing I felt with, there was another series called Turma do Ghetto that was on the Record television network. And it was just full of this gangsterism, black men as the violent element of the series. I was just very disappointed. This Suburbia was on for like 4 episodes and then it disappeared. It just really, Suburbia and the other series, Sexo ASAS, were highly criticized by Afro-Brazilian, people who were watching the series. By the time Sexo ASAS made it to its like 12th, 13th, 14th episode, it was so highly criticized that Global knew this series wouldn't be back for a second season because people had just, by that time, social media was big. And I don't think Global could offset the negative comments that people were making online about this television series. It was like, black women are always sexualized in Brazilian productions, and then you're going to put out a series. I mean, just the name itself, Sexo ASAS, right? So, this is one of the problems. People often also blame the white director of that particular television series. It's like, it's not enough to have black people in front of the screen. If you've got white people behind the cameras who are going to present black people in the way that they've been taught to present them in the media. Okay. So, continuing with this piece, if you are a white person who had access to television in your childhood, you probably grew up watching movies, series, and television shows in which princesses, heroes, and most of the characters look like you. They had the same physical features, mannerisms, ways of speaking, and also resembled much of your family. But if you are a black Brazilian person who grew up watching these same programs and broadcasters, the reality is quite different. Now, this is a photo. Somebody wrote some graffiti on the bottom of the Global Television Network headquarters. It might be in Sao Paulo. I'm not sure if it's in Sao Paulo or Rio, but I think this picture was taken during the run of the Sexo ASAS television series. People were outraged by the series. And, it's not just now that people have defined Brazil's media, specifically television, Global TV, as being racist. Not only are black people underrepresented, but when you present them, you have tried and true types of stereotypes that you always present black characters, in this manner. So people are fed up. This is another thing that Global and other television networks in Brazil are having to change their formula because they're starting to lose a little bit of their audience as people have access to streaming now, the Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney. Other black Brazilians are actually getting their own streaming networks together. So the stories that were coming out, the reports that were coming out were saying that Brazilians don't see themselves on television because they keep choosing to present Brazil as if it's a Europe in the tropics with all white faces. So as they start losing segments, percentages of the market, they realized like, okay, we're going to have to change this because people aren't buying it anymore. Some people stopped watching the soap operas because they just didn't see the reality that it was presenting. It was only presenting a certain parcel of Brazil's population, which is usually middle class and white. So anyway, in addition, an analysis of the last 23 soap operas of the global TV network, less than 12% of the characters present were Black people, according to a graph produced by the GShow data. Now, GShow is it's actually part of the global. It's another television channel, and I could say the group of television channels that are produced by the the head global television network. So this is what this, just look at the representation here. These 12 white figures here versus the purple figures here. The white figures represent the Black representation in these novellas. Okay, so from 2012 to 2022, 1,239 characters appeared on primetime screens of the global television network. However, only 141 of them were Black, corresponding to 11.4% of the total. Now, that's important because according to Afro-Brazilian militants, Brazil is supposed to be 56% Black or 56% Black and brown. I can't co-sign that more than 56% of the population is Black. You could say Black and brown, obviously, but if we're just talking about specifically Black people, and part of the Black population is considered brown in Brazil, if I was a guessing man, I don't think we'll ever know how many Black Brazilians there are because just it's too hard to decipher what you consider Black in Brazil. But if I was a guessing man, I'd say it could go from anywhere from 25 to 33 to 40%. Those are just how I would see it, if I was to take a guess. So with those numbers, 11.4% is definitely considered underrepresentation of the Black population.